Okay, for this next chunk, we're going to take a big technical step forward. And what we're going to do is we're going to allow two different web browsers to chat with one another. Basically, we're going to be building a lightweight Slack in order to enable our ultimate players of our Reversi game to be able to communicate to one another via the moves in their game. So what I want to do first is walk through the architecture of what we're about to build, and then in the next video, we'll actually build it. All right, so the chat server is going to look like this. At a high level, we want two browsers to be able to play each other. In order to do that, they're going to need to be able to send data back and forth. Rather than jumping all the way to that end goal, what we're going to do is create an intermediate step in which two browsers are able to send chat messages back and forth, just text messages that they type into the console. Later, we'll alter this so that they can send game messages back and forth, and those game messages will be generated by the actions they take rather than things that they explicitly type in. So if you've been following along so far, this is about what our current setup is, and it should be what you have. Basically, we can run our web server locally or on Heroku. When I say run our web server, what I mean is to run the server.js file using the command node server.js. If you run that on your local machine, then you'll be able to access the web browser by typing in the URL localhost:8080/index.html, and that'll bring up the index.html file served from your local file system. If you commit those files to your GitHub repository and sync it using source tree, then Heroku will be notified of those changes and will launch the new files on Heroku. And then you can access the same functionality by going to the Heroku's URL. All right, so that's our current setup. We know we can run it locally by running it in a terminal, or we can run it remotely by looking at it in Heroku. So we can do either one of those things. And so from this point forward, what I want to do is abstract away the idea of where our server is actually running from. We'll know that our server is running somewhere, and we'll think about whether or not our files are being delivered or not delivered, but we're not going to worry so much about whether it's being served locally or on Heroku. And so what that means is that we're going to see a setup that generically looks like this. We have a web browser. It's going to be accessing our server somewhere, and our server is going to be serving up files from the file system co-located with that server. That might be on the Heroku system, that might be on our local host, but they should be mirrors of one another. All right, now based on previous work that we've done, in our file system we know we have basically 3 files. We also have the overhead for running Node, but the primary files in our content directory, the public directory, are the index.html file, which is our landing page, an about page, which tells a little bit of the background of our game, which we haven't demonstrated filling out yet. Both index.html and about.html link out to the Wikipedia page for rules. And then we also had a placeholder, name.html, which is where we went if we clicked on the Let's Play button in index.html. So that's what we've got right now. In this next coding chunk, we're going to add 2 new files. We're going to add a lobby.html file, and that file is going to call its own little bit of JavaScript in a file called main.js. So at any given moment, when we're running our web browser, we may type something into the URL. For example, if we're requesting the index.html file, and in which case it will be requested from our server. The code running in server.js will get it from the file system, we'll pass it through its mechanisms and deliver it back to our browser, and our browser will render it. If we're looking at our browser and then we click on the Let's Play button, that will request a file from our server again. The server will get name.html from the file system and deliver that back to our browser. Our browser will render the name.html file. What we're going to do in this next coding chunk is we're going to change name.html so that you can enter in a username. And when you hit enter, accepting that username, we'll make another request to URL from our server, and we'll request the lobby.html file, but this time we're going to alter the URL so that the username is passed as a parameter on that URL. So when we request it, we will get the lobby.html file, and that extra parameter will be on the end of it, and we'll be able to look at that using JavaScript. When the lobby.html file arrives at our browser will try and render it. And in the process of trying to render it, it's going to see that within lobby.html, we require another file in order to render this document, another resource, and that's going to be main.js. So we'll request main.js from our server.js, from our server that's running, and it will deliver main.js also as well. And then we'll have both of those files located in our web browser. Our web browser is then going to start running main.js. We're also going to require another library, but that library is not going to be hosted by us. That's called socket.io. Once all those resources are in our browser, then in our browser, we're going to start running JavaScript in the same way that we're also running JavaScript on our server. In our browser, the kinds of code that we're going to be running will be to create messages. And those messages are going to be sent between our local browser and the server. Now, these aren't going to be URL requests. These are going to be WebSocket requests so that we can send little bits of data back and forth that don't require a full web page load. This is going to be pretty lightweight, and they'll go back and forth between the two locations several times as we pass data back and forth. Now, the effect will be from the user is that once we have multiple web pages up, they'll all be connected to the same server, and it will appear as if we've got just web browsers talking back and forth to each other without even realizing there's a server in the way, but there will be, right? So that's what we're going to do next. I'll break this video for a second so that we can pick up in a clean video, but that's where we're heading, and that's the architecture. So we'll start that in just a second. Thank you.